So Black Power media, as revolutionary as they present themselves, they're actually not revolutionary. They're Orientalist and Islamophobic and reactionary. And this video kind of demonstrates it. Let's take a listen.
Brilliant genius Dr. CBS responds with sheesh. And then here.
And again, they're promoting Greg Carr, who's a notable Islamophobe and Orientalist. We'll get into him in a little bit here, but yeah. So let's get into their guest. They invited Sister Evelyn on. And this is what, and Sister Evelyn, she was blatantly disrespected by Diallo. This was back in October. But the Islamophobia at Black Power Media and the Orientalism seems to be quite a problem. Look how Jared, who's the descendant of Russian Jewish kibbutzniks, claims to support Palestine, yet, remember I made the video he ran cover for liberal Zionist Martin Luther King? Just saying. And again, Ramiro Sebastian Funes kind of tipped me off to how bad Jared Ball was. And this is further evidence.
Well, of Islam. In the Quran, it says religion should not be compulsion. That's chapter 2 of the Quran. It shouldn't be compulsion. You're actually supposed to come to it by choice. And so I came to Islam by choice. I'm a convert of 4 years. I was born in a Christian family, Baptist family. I was not practicing any religion for a long time. And in that intermediate period, while I believed in God, wasn't practicing any religion, I started studying religion and started studying Islam in particular for about 3 years. And that led me to becoming Muslim, actually. And so I think there's a lot of aspects of religion that are really useful for our human development, for our consciousness, and for our intellectual development that go beyond prophets and messages and all the things that come out of religious doctrine. So I think there's a much fuller and broader conversation and a larger context and nuances that are missed in some of the statements that are made, particularly around religion, but specifically around Islam and Muslims. And Diallo, this is particularly some things that you've said, murder cults. That's definitely something I would like to talk about today. How is cult being defined? How is murder cult being defined? Distinguishing the NOI, the Nation of Islam, from the larger international Muslim community is another thing. The larger international Muslim community doesn't consider the NOI Muslims, and we can talk about why that is. You said that you can't be religious and revolutionary, which I think is a inherent contradiction for the very guests that we've had on this program. So there's a lot of different things. We probably don't have enough time actually to talk about all of them, but those are some things that I would like to specifically address, but we can kind of take this in whatever direction you all want.
So I know I have like maybe a few questions that both can answer, and maybe it'll direct a conversation. I do believe because these conversations could be complex, emotionally charged, and then we'll sometimes have what people call bad faith arguments. So hopefully we can kind of keep it in a line. So maybe opening up, both can respond to the idea of like race, religion, and colonialism, how you see those three connects, how they are in opposition of each other or whatever, but just your initial thoughts on race, religion, and colonialism. And Diallo or Evelyn, you can go first, and then the other can exchange.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that religion has been used as a source and force and tool of colonization, of slavery, and of many systems of oppression that exist today as they did centuries ago. There's no doubt about that. And no one that's honest would deny that. And I also want to acknowledge the harm and the trauma that's come out of religion and the judgmental nature of it. And I write about this too. Like, I have no problem critiquing religion or critiquing Islam. Actually, I wrote a piece in Hood Communist not too long ago that listed several critiques of Islam. The classism, the sexism, the racism, all of it. We could talk about that for a very long time, and so there's no doubt about that. But I think that you also have to separate what's said in religious doctrine from the people that practice those religions. And there's also a lot of different interpretations of what's said. We don't all even agree within these communities about how these things are interpreted. And so, again, as you said, Geechee, I think this is a much broader conversation to have. And I am interested, Diallo, actually, in your position on that. And I want to contest this idea that Islam is an African, because everything is socially constructed. Like, I'm trying to figure out what isn't socially constructed. Like, all religions have been socially constructed. Gender has been socially constructed. Everything has been socially constructed, especially if you're an atheist and don't believe in God, then literally everything is socially constructed. And so, of course, religion is also socially constructed, even though I think that spirituality and the soul and the spirit are things that maybe have existed forever and certainly prior to formal religion. So yeah, I'll stop there. I'm kind of going in a bunch of different directions, but I am interested in Diallo's comment on that, and then maybe I can respond.
All right. So Diallo, initial response to what was said already, but also tie in your idea of race, religion, and colonialism, the connections and antagonisms.
First of all, I appreciate you coming on and being willing to engage this topic. Out the gate where you state that where a lot of believers try to assert that there are so many people who don't properly practice Islam, and they don't conduct themselves appropriately in Islam, and there are certain tenets in Islam, such as no forced conversions, where we all, in our lifetimes, have seen all of those contradicted and subverted. The so-called positive tenet of Islam we see on a daily basis subverted and violated with no input and no interference from any supernatural forces. So when I hear people talk about Islam and peace, that sounds to me like someone talking about America and democracy.
So, again, Diallo Kenyatta is an Islamophobe. The fact that this guy, Jared Ball, is letting him spout his Islamophobic and Orientalist propaganda, that's a problem.
Or capitalism, free market, and opportunity. I do, and I can discuss the tenets or the rhetoric or the dogma, but when you can only discuss the tenet, the rhetoric, and the dogma absent from the practice, application, and impacts on the real world, I think you have a pretty illegitimate belief system.
I can discuss all of that, and most Muslims can as well. So which part do you want me to discuss? Because we can definitely discuss all of that. And actually, I'm drawing from, Kwame Ture, who was specifically talking about Christianity, separating the principles of Christianity from the practice of Christians, which I think is, again, these concepts and these ideas transcend religion. You can't talk about a whole group of people. You're talking about Islam and Muslim. These are over 2 billion people in the world. There are all sorts of different sects, S-E-C-T, of Islam. And then there's the NOI. Like there's
Great points by Sister Evelyn, and I would like to say Jazakallah khair to Sister Evelyn for going on Black Power Media and exposing Diallo Kenyatta as an Islamophobe and an Orientalist, and exposing Jared Ball for running cover for Islamophobes and Orientalists, because that's what Jared Ball is essentially doing. Jared Ball is part of the problem. Jared Ball is an Islamophobe and an Orientalist himself. Again, his maternal lineage is Russian Ashkenazi Jews that lived on a kibbutz in Palestine. They were Zionist. His maternal lineage is Russian Zionist squatters in Palestine. They went from Russia to Palestine and then to United States of America. Okay? Jared Ball is no friend to the Ummah. Let's be honest.
All these different relationships and cultures and histories, and you're lumping everyone together in a monolith. And that's the same thing that white supremacists do. You know what I'm saying? You can't just say, oh, Islam is a murder cult. Where is the foundation? I want to see what are the examples of that? I do agree that religious oppression, Islamic oppression, does exist.
Stop playing into his arguments, Sister Evelyn. Stop even playing into considering playing into his arguments.
I experience these things in masjids all the time. I experience these things. I'm not denying that. But where are your examples of this murderous cult mentality? Because all I see is Muslims being murdered, actually. So I need more clarity around that.
Great point by Sister Evelyn. Great point by Sister Evelyn that globally, the U.S. empire, the Zionist entity, the English empire, the French empire target Muslims.
And we know our religion. That's another thing too. Muslims know our religion, and we know our book, and we know the Prophet Muhammad. We know the life of the Prophet Muhammad. It's called Hadith, Hadith. We study the life. We know about this prophet, what he ate, what kind of sandals he wore, right?
So
We read the entire Quran every Ramadan from beginning to end. Okay, and we study other religions too.
Let him respond.
Brainwash people walking into this. I told you at the start, I studied Islam for 3 years before I converted. I'm not under any delusion or brainwashed. I know exactly what I came into, and I have my own questions and my disagreements with specific statements in the Quran, with interpretations of things mentioned in the Quran and Hadith. I absolutely do, but I'm not brainwashed. Hundreds of Africans that I engage in routinely are not brainwashed. We know exactly what we do and why we do it, and we can tell you the principles of why we do it, and the doctrine around it, and the discipline around it. And so we talk about prayer and talk about people beating their heads on the ground. There's specific intention around the 5 daily prayers that Muslims engage in. That beating your head on the ground is called sujood, Sujood. It's not beating your head on the ground. There's a meaning behind that. Let me read a little bit of that for you.
Could you let him respond first, so he can?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And then I'll tell you about the head banging, the sujood, what that actually means, because there's significance around that.
Go ahead, Diallo.
Correction, I said bumping your head on the floor, not beat your head on the ground. Now, I don't know if I should speak to what's just been said or...
See, Diallo's an Islamophobe. And the ringleader of Black Power Media, Jared Ball's right there, but he's not saying anything. Why? His maternal grandparents were Russian Zionist kibbutznik squatters, right?
Or complete my initial point?
Yes, yeah, finish the initial point.
Well, my initial point was that many believers in absurdities, such as the existence of God, the existence of prophets, prophecies and holy scriptures, have to retreat to the point that the vast majority of believers don't get it right, but I'm the one who got it right. But because religions specifically, less Islam specifically, but we can take this to Hinduism and Christianity, Judaism, because it is a baseless belief, because it is people trying to impose make-believe on the material reality, you're going to have sectarianism, and ultimately they will lead to violence and intimidation and imposition, because there is no reason, there is no logic, there is no evidence that such belief systems are based on. And so, as we know, as human beings, we make up a lot of noble beliefs, a lot of noble writings, a lot of noble stories, myths, and folklore. The Constitution, being a student of politics and political science and public policy, the Constitution is a beautiful document written by monsters.
This drives me crazy. Why is Diallo comparing the U.S. Constitution to the Quran? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. Diallo is an Islamophobe. Diallo is an Orientalist. Why is Jared Ball platforming an Orientalist and an Islamophobe such as Diallo Kenyatta? Diallo Kenyatta is a problem. Why is Jared Ball just sitting there, running cover, not doing anything, and letting this circus clown, Diallo Kenyatta, spout Orientalist Islamophobic talking points on his platform?
And whenever African people begin to detail the atrocities of the United States, a lot of racists run to the Constitution and the freedom of speech and the various individual liberties and all of that, when every African on the face of the earth understands that what was written in that sacred document, the U.S. Constitution, was never fully applied, or as Dr. King said, never lived up to the content of its creed. And it is...
Oh, so now he's quoting Zionists, because that's what Dr. King was. MLK was a liberal Zionist. So, again, look at the connection. Diallo Kenyatta, making Islamophobic and Orientalist talking points, quoting Zionist Martin Luther King. Are we really surprised?
It's the same thing, and I also find it very curious that many believers in the higher power believers in the all-knowing, omnipresent, omnipotent, omnibenevolent force, that is Allah, often retreat to basic human understanding. Well, everything else does, atheism, socialism. You don't get to say that your understandings, your conclusions, come from the divine source of that, from the origins of existence, and then run to things that we acknowledge are man-made, that are not divinely sourced, that are not supreme, that are not going to be simply justified through.
Diallo's got it. Diallo doesn't know what he's talking about. Diallo's clearly an Islamophobe. He is clearly an Orientalist. That's what Diallo is. Diallo represents Black Orientalism. That's what he represents. Jared Ball, the ringleader of Black Power Media, is running cover for him. Jared Ball is running cover for Orientalist, Islamophobe Diallo Kenyatta.
Belief in our hearts and our souls and our spirits. So you either have to pick a lane. Are you divinely inspired from the all-knowing, omnipresent, omnibenevolent force, or are you simply following a man-made doctrine, man-made belief system? Because I acknowledge everything I adhere to, morality, my ethics, my values, are all man-made. And I can point to some of the individuals who made it up, or point to the individuals who helped to construct and advance it. And there are all flawed men and women who can be challenged, who can be checked, who can be amended, who can be rewritten, who can be simply dismissed, all freely. But if you're telling me you have insights from the beginning of time and from the most powerful and present being in all existence, you don't get to fall into my arena. I expect you to have a different source of justification or excusing the many atrocities. Now, moving on to murder cults, and I'll conclude there. It is quite disruptive to my constitution. I can't say it hurts my heart, my spirit, but it's disruptive to me to have an African woman ask me about the blood that Islam, that has been shed in the name of Islam, the mountains of African.
So, again, Diallo resorts to Islamophobic and Orientalist talking points when talking about Islam. Jared Ball goes along because guess what? Jared Ball's an Islamophobe and an Orientalist himself. Jared Ball's maternal grandparents were Russian Zionist squatters who went from Russia, illegally invaded Palestine, and then they went to the United States, to the DC area, right? That's the story of Jared Ball's maternal lineage. Not surprised he's running cover for Islamophobe and Orientalist Diallo Kenyatta. By the way, there are Muslims. I know Muslims with the name Diallo. It's usually a last name, but I know Sunni Muslims with the last name Diallo. Diallo Kenyatta is offensive to Muslims with the name Diallo.
Followed up by Islam, which if we wanted to honestly define Islam, I've often been fond of saying that Islam is icing on a cake called Arab nationalism. When Africans have been enslaved, have been mutilated, have been dehumanized, have been colonized, have been displaced by Muslims and justified through Islam. And we don't even have to go back to antiquity.
So this is what you call, let me see, where is this? So Diallo Kenyatta is a Black Orientalist, and Black Orientalism is an intellectual and cultural movement found primarily within African American circles. While similar to the general movement of Orientalism in its negative outlook upon Western Asian, especially Arab culture and religion, it differs in both emphasis upon the role of the so-called Arab slave trade and so-called Coolie slave trade in the historic relationship between Africa and the Arab and greater Muslim world, as well as the lack of colonial promotion over West Asia, as was promoted by European Orientalism in the same region. The term Black Orientalism was first used by Kenyan academic Ali Mazrui in his critique of Henry Louis Gates' documentary Wonders of Africa. Supporters of this movement include writers such as Chinwezu Ibekwe. So, Diallo that's what Diallo is. Diallo is a Black Orientalist. Diallo's an Islamophobe. Diallo's an Islamophobe and a Black Orientalist. And look who's here silently. Look who's here sitting silently. Jared Ball. Shame on Jared Ball. Again, Jared Ball's maternal grandparents were Russian Zionist squatters who illegally invaded Palestine and then left Palestine for the United States. Either New York or DC, right? That's who Jared Ball is. Not surprised Jared Ball is a Black Orientalist and an Islamophobe and likes promoting Black Orientalists and Islamophobe like Diallo Kenyatta.
We don't even have to go to the North African slave trade. We can go up to Detroit and see the mistreatment of African people by their so-called Muslim brothers, their Arab Muslim brothers. So I find it hard to accept when someone can believe in something that is so baseless and made up, that it will allow you to ignore the material impact of African people. And one more thing you said about individual and personal beliefs. There's nothing individual or personal. If I say I'm an American patriot, I cannot say that that's just my individual feelings about this country. When this is a global empire, Islam is another global force of imperialism, resource extraction, enslavement, dehumanization. And to pretend like it's some personal journey. When you join a sect, when I say, listen, you got to claim your sect. And I don't care if you convert to Islam, get banged into the Crips, or call yourself a Pan-Africanist. You got to claim that. You cannot cherry pick and say, well, I'm on the periphery, or I'm in the core, and all the things being done by and within my movement just don't apply to me, because this is an individual thing. Individualism, humans are nothing more than components. Individuals are nothing more than components or aspects of the whole. So if you allow yourself to become one aspect of a whole thing, then that whole thing also, you take responsibility.
Diallo Kenyatta, as I've said, is an Islamophobe and an Orientalist. And look who's just sitting by. Jared Ball, the maternal grandson of Zionist Russian kibbutzniks. That's who Jared Ball is. And I want to highlight, we'll wait till Diallo mentions it, till he mentions John Henrik Clarke, because we got a whole world of debunking to do about John Henrik Clarke, to expose the Islamophobia and Orientalism of John Henrik Clarke.
And the only thing I just want to say very quickly, just to clarify the comment. Again, the murder cults specifically is a reference to John Henrik Clarke's quote that all religions are male chauvinist murder cults and the handmaidens of conquerors. I just wanted to...
He left the word out. A very important word.
Go ahead.
He said all Western religions.
No, he didn't. He didn't specify.
Now these two fucking goofballs, these two Orientalist, Islamophobic goofballs are arguing over what John Henrik Clarke, an Orientalist and Islamophobe, said.
I said it right. All religions are male chauvinist murder cults. He said it repeatedly in writing and in speech. And
John Henrik Clarke, and this is who Black Power Media promotes. They literally did a whole day commemorating John Henrik Clarke. Like, and if we want to expose John Henrik Clarke, this is from Bilal al-Sudan. All right. So let's read it. The fact that such a master teacher as John Henrik Clarke can make a historically inaccurate claim does not mean at all that he is less of an authority. Why? And this is what I disagree with Brother Bilal al-Sudan on. John Henrik Clarke is an Orientalist, right? The fact that he's an Islamophobe and an Orientalist kind of undermines him. I want to see, where's chapter 3? I want to see where this is. What time we got? Where is this? So he says, though one of our great teachers, the scholarly output, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, is not beyond criticism and correction. And this is particularly the case as it relates to Dr. Clarke's discussions on Islam. While he is generally correct in his history that he presents and certainly justified in the perspective, no, he's not justified. He's not justified. And the Black Dawa Network can debunk that. So this is a conversation. This is a conversation about between a Muslim, an African Muslim, and an Afrocentrist. And notice, so notice that, again, the Afrocentrists like quoting Haj Malik al-Shabazz, rahimahullah, and they like quoting people like Muhammad Ali, rahimahullah, but those brothers were Muslim, right? But I wonder, where does it say? So here's what it says. Those men, John Henrik Clarke, Chancellor Williams, John Henrik Clarke, and Ben Jochonen, relied on the Orientalist canon for their perspective on the Arab slave trade. Their bibliographies testify to this. When you look into their books and the sources they drew upon, as it was Western canon of Orientalist thought about slavery in the Indian Ocean, that they base their assertion. The irony of Afrocentrism is that when it comes to the subject of Islam, it is based squarely on Eurocentrism. Right? So no one was calling the Arab slave trade until the Europeans, namely the British, investment in East Africa. Without the moral crusade of European colonists like the East India Company, later the London Missionary Society and Church Missionary Society in the Indian Ocean, the Indian Ocean trade does not become known as the Arab slave trade. The Indian Ocean trade predates Arabs and the rise of Islam by over 1,000 years. Some say this commercial enterprise dated back to the Harappa of ancient India. The point is that it acquires the name Arab slave trade because of the obstacle that Islam poses to the British being able to spread Christianity in the region and usurp African sovereignty. But Islam had been present in that part of Africa since the time of Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it had nothing to do with slavery. Slavery is not how East Africans in East Africa became Muslim. It was not the process of Islamization. Before the 18th century, the Arab slave trade was never singled out as destructive to Africa, which was in the middle of a resistance. Rather, in the Indian Ocean trade was treated like every other enterprise that African kingdoms had been engaging in since time immemorial. During the entire time over the course of 1,000 years of the African-Arab trade, Sub-Saharan Africa remained sovereign, not colonized, sovereign. And here's another one. Black Dawa Network launches online course challenging Black Orientalism. Shout out to the Black Dawa Network. And so in this course, we will expose the errancy of the anti-Muslim manifestations of Afrocentrism among the Black conscious community. The course will deconstruct the statements by Moletti Kete Asante, John Henrik Clarke, Chancellor Williams, and Yusuf Ben Jokenen as regards to Islam and Black Orientalisms and Black Americans. We will assess today's Black conscious community using their statements and track record. After the course, we will grasp Black Orientalism's primary arguments against Islam and how most effectively to respond. That was a notification from my uncle. I'm going out to dinner with my uncle. So the course will enable the student to refute their claims that Islam spread to Africa through the Arab slave trade. Africans were not converted to Islam by force. And it will refute that Islam is Arab imperialism and that Black people should adopt traditional African religions. To do this, the historicity of each will be examined in detail to separate fact from fiction. Separate fact from fiction. The student will be able to articulate the information in a highly polemical environment using rhetorical methods that have been proven highly effective. And also, we're gonna this course will help you destruct the Afrocentrics claim that Africa was spiritual and not religious. The religion that was brought by Arabs and Europeans. This is a central myth of Afrocentrism in the conscious community that is integral to their critique of Islam and claims to authenticity. The student will leave the course with the framework for understanding their term of the use of the term African spirituality, motives for this false language, and how to articulate Africa's religious heritage that does not play into the false dichotomy of African versus Islamic. And how does it account for fictionalizing of ancient Egypt and the role of Black political thought? The Kemet is anachronistic and is illegitimate barometer for measuring Africanity and judging Islam. And then trace the Eurocentric origins and highlight the Eurocentric elements of Afrocentrism and the conscious community. These ideations are African only in appearance. The student will see their view of Africanity is predicated on Western concepts of African religions in the West, antipathy for Islam. This is Orientalism. That is Orientalism that is the basis for Black Orientalism. And the student will comprehend historiography. The student will leave with a grasp of sources to have a sound understanding of the history of the history. The history of the history details evolution and perspective and theory. Man, maybe I'm not Black, but maybe I should enroll in this. So Afrocentrism emerged in the late 1980s to counter the racism inherent in the narrative about Africa. It sought to highlight the contributions of Africa and Africans to the world. During the late 80s and early 90s, four names rang out most when one mentioned Afrocentrism: Chancellor Williams, Molefi Kete Asante, John Henrik Clarke, and Dr. Yosef Ben Jokanan, also known as Dr. Ben. There was an anti-Islamic tone in their work that began among African Americans, then Eurocentric lies about Africa's inferiority. Their perspective on Africa was that Islam was an Arab Trojan horse for cultural domination of Africa, and Islam has been nothing more than a tool of Arab imperialism. As classical Afrocentrism waned and was replaced with what has been termed Black consciousness community in the early 2000s, there was a strong de-emphasis on historiography. Personalities big on flamboyancy and antics and low on research have dominated the thought landscape. Social media has become the most dominant medium, displacing research and books with message threads and YouTube videos. Unfortunately, this is the level of access for many Black people. The NOI was successful in their outreach because their message was accessible to the people. The Muhammad Speaks and Today's Final Call gave Black people in the hood direct exposure to the teachings and organization because it was put in streets. Here at the Black Dawah Network, we believe that the message of Islam is to combat not just the physical and spiritual ills within the Black communities, but the intellectual toxins pumped into our shared discourse by pseudo-intellectual charlatans. Then Islam must become intellectual capital by circulating through the hood with all of the negative influences. Obviously, Afrocentrism and Black conscious community are not threats poised to extinguish Islam in Black communities. In fact, they have all but imploded recently. They lack organization, structure, coherency, and overall discipline. They are more of a nuisance, yet their rhetoric as it relates to Islam has had a toxic effect on the perception of Islam by some members of the African American community of Islam as a liberating force and must be challenged. The course will also discuss the adab, manner, and decorum that is suited for engaging in members of this faction. The course will be co-taught by Professor Sharif Mohammed and Brother Hakim Mohammed. Professor Sharif Mohammed has taught Islamic studies and African American studies at the historically black college of Spelman University. Hakim Mohammed has served as a lecturer in debate, argumentation, and philosophy seminars at Harvard University, UC Berkeley, and Michigan State. Inshallah, the African American Dawah Academy's first online course, Responding to Black Orientalism, will be available for enrollment February 22, 2020. Jazakallah khair. Okay. So, again, and to counter against John Henrik Clarke, he is not justified. I don't think he's justified. This is by Bilal al-Sudan. Oh, it's by Wesley Muhammad. So, and this goes into the peculiar case of the black Islamophobe. I'm going to do a whole video on this article because it's such a great article. And I'm going to do a whole video on the articles put out by the Black Dawah Network. But I think this is all the time I have for today. So there we go. But, because I have to go to dinner pretty soon, so... Black Orientalism. So this came from black Christians, but also certain Afrocentrics, John Henrik Clarke, who espoused what the University of Michigan professor Sherman Jackson has termed Black Orientalism, the reductive ideological position in which Islam is synonym for Arab, and therefore culpable in the East African slave trade and any and all forms of Arab so-called imperialism in quotes. Right? Yet, the anti-Muslim found in the statements of Juan Williams and Herman Cain is starkly different from these older hostilities because today's anti-Muslim bias has roots in America's white supremacy, right? So, where's the other one? There we go. So, reaction by Muslim writers. The term Black Orientalism was first used by Kenyan academic Ali Mazrui in his online critique of Henry Louis Gates Jr.'s documentary, Workers of the African World, or Wonders of the African World. Mazrui had criticized the film for having demarkedly de-emphasized the history of Islam in Africa to the point where the history of Nigeria, half of whose population is Muslim, was all but absent from the general coverage by the documentary. The term was later used by Sherman Jackson in an article for Islamica magazine, which criticized Black Orientalism as a backlash from the often conservative Christian African studies scholars who have seen Black Islam as a political threat of sorts. The article was included in his book, Islam and the Black American.
I have to revisit that.
But he did.
Male chauvinist murder cults.
That's what I said, yeah.
Okay.
No. I said that all religions are male chauvinist murder cults and the handmaidens of conquerors. That's the. But
and we just detailed that John Henrik Clarke was an Islamophobe and an Orientalist. Yep, my